Apple has a new version of its iconic MacBook Air. This new for 2022 version has some big changes both on the outside and the inside. Now, over the years, at various times, I've referred to the 13-inch MacBook Air as the most universally useful laptop you can buy. That has not been true of every iteration, but generally it's been true more times than not, even going all the way back to the original MacBook Air, which I first reviewed way back in 2008. In this new version, well, you've got a new design, you've got some new colors, you've got a new chip inside, the M2 versus the M1. There's changes to the screen, changes to the webcam. There is, however, one change I am not a big fan of, and that is a change to the starting price. For a big chunk of its lifespan, the MacBook Air has started at $999, which is a nice digestible price. Occasionally it's gone above that, usually come back down. Well, now the MacBook Air is back to a starting price of $1199. That's $200 more. And frankly, that makes a big difference for a lot of people. The previous MacBook Air, the M1 version with the older design, is actually still going to be available at $999, so Apple can say they have a $1,000 laptop. But frankly, looking at the two of them side by side, I'd be very hard pressed to give up all the cool new stuff in the new model just to save $200. That said, I wish the new one was also $999, and maybe in a year or two it will be. So taken all together, the new design, the new features, it's really probably the biggest overall change to the MacBook Air since that original 2008 model. Definitely the biggest change since the last big physical redesign, which was around 2018. If this new MacBook Air looks familiar, that's because it takes a lot of the design cues from the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. These all kind of look like part of the same family now, with this more squared-off, modern, minimalist design, getting rid of the taper that MacBook Airs have had since the very beginning. So a big leap for the Air, really makes it look and feel a lot more like a Pro. I think it's a big improvement, but maybe that's just because I'm so used to the classic MacBook Air look, I'm ready for a change. Now, there's still one odd man out in the current MacBook lineup. The MacBook Pro, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, which also has the new M2 chip, actually keeps that older tapered design with all the stuff that goes with it, like the older low-res webcam and no MagSafe and stuff like that. You could still get that. That's the other new MacBook for this season. Obviously, the MacBook Air goes a lot further with its changes. And the new MacBook Air actually goes beyond the 14 and 16-inch Pro in one interesting area. It adds some new colors, moving beyond the silver, gray, into gold kind of tones we've had for MacBooks for a while. Now we've got two new colors. In addition to silver and space gray, you've got Starlight, which is again kind of goldish, and then you've got Midnight, which is a deep matte black that reminds me, and should remind you, of course, of the old polycarbonate black MacBook, that classic laptop from the mid-2000s. Really one of my all-time favorites, and I've been waiting a long time for that look to come back. And of course, when I got a chance to get one of the new MacBook Airs, I had to make sure I got that midnight color. If you put it side by side, the M1 Air and the M2 Air, the new one, the footprint is just a little bit smaller. It doesn't taper down as thin in the front, but it's a little bit thinner overall, and it's a hair lighter. I think it's 2.7 pounds versus 2.8 pounds. So not a huge difference there, but this has always been a great, very portable laptop, the kind of laptop you can put in your bag and take around with you just about every day. I always go out and take it to the coffee shop, take it on the subway, bring it to the office. If you want to do something like that, you really need a 13-inch or smaller laptop that weighs a reasonable amount, under 3 pounds, at the very most. So really the big reasons you're going to go for this new M2 version of the Air over the M1 version are the screen that's a little bit bigger and brighter, the new design and new colors, the M2 chip versus the M1 chip, and I think the most important thing is the new higher res webcam, replacing that old 720 webcam that MacBook Airs have had pretty much forever. You also now get the MagSafe connection back in the MacBook Air. Years ago, all MacBooks had the MagSafe connection. It was a little magnetic power plug, and if you tripped over it, it would pop right out. It was great. They got rid of it. Then they went to USB-C power for everything. Now you still have USB-C power, which I think is great because it's universal among almost every laptop now and many other devices as well. So you really just need one power adapter, and you can use it to charge all your different things. But now you have the MagSafe option again in MacBooks. You got it in the 14-inch and 16-inch Pros. Now you have it in the MacBook Air, and you can use that if you want. I generally tend to leave a USB-C cable, in any room I'm in or any part of the office, so I just plug into that instead. You've also oddly got some power adapter choices. If you choose the base model new MacBook Air, that $1,200 version, you get the standard 30-watt MagSafe connection. Cool. They've actually got a new one, a 35-watt version that's built into a very small little power brick that has 2 USB-C ports in it, one for the power cable and one just an extra one, but you have to get the upgraded version of the MacBook Air in order to get that, or you can pay an extra $20 for it. You can also throw in $20 and get the gigantic 67-watt version of the MacBook charger, which will charge faster, but obviously is bigger and bulkier, much harder to throw in your bag and take with you. Listen, the MacBook Air is fine if you're working at your desk, in the office, or at your work from home office. I think it really has to go on the go with you in order to shine. It's a great coffee shop companion. I've carried a MacBook Air around with me for many years, although frankly, over time, some newer laptops have gotten thinner, have gotten lighter, become even more portable. I spent some time recently with the Surface Laptop Go 2, which is a much more budget-conscious laptop than this one, but that was actually a really nice small system to take around with me. Frankly, I think all-time the greatest travel laptop was the late lamented 12-inch MacBook, almost forgotten now, which I thought was fantastic, super thin, super light. Maybe that'll be the next MacBook to come back from the dead. Now, while this MacBook is only a hair smaller than the M1 version, it actually is bigger in one important respect, and that is it has a 13.6-inch display instead of a 13.3-inch display. If you look at them side by side, it's a pretty nice difference, actually. The bezels are thinner, so you get more screen in pretty much the same lid space. Now, cut into this is the new webcam. It's a 1080 camera, the same as on the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. The Air previously and the 13-inch Pro, they have the older 720 cameras that nobody ever really liked, and that's become increasingly important because we're all doing these video meetings and Zoom meetings all the time now, certainly much more than we used to, and having a good webcam is much more important than it used to be. So maybe you could forgive the lower res camera on a MacBook Air before, but these days I think you really need a 1080 camera, and many other laptop manufacturers are moving to it. Apple's been moving to it slowly, system by system, so now the new camera is in the MacBook Air as well. The trade-off is, like the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, it's in a notch. You've got the notch on your iPhone, now you've got the notch on your MacBook Air, it's obviously on some of the MacBook Pros as well. If you hate the notch, you're going to still hate it. If you don't mind the notch, you're still not going to mind it. So this is the 720 camera in the old M1 MacBook Air. And over here on this side, this is the 1080 camera in the new M2 MacBook Air. So old camera right here, low res, we've complained about it for years. And higher res camera here in the M2 MacBook Air. Looking forward to using this on Zoom calls. And this is also the audio from the microphone built into the M2 MacBook Air. Old? New. Now, I do have one note to add about the otherwise very cool midnight black color on the new MacBook Air. It attracts a lot of fingerprints, I'm not gonna lie. I had to carry a clean cloth around with me everywhere. Every time I wanted to take a picture of it, I had to wipe it down first. I feel like this is very common with matte black or dark objects. They have certainly not cracked the code on how to prevent that here. So just be aware, this is not only an issue you're gonna have if you're eating snacks at the same time, it just gets fingerprints on it no matter what. We've talked about a lot of the changes on the outside and a lot of feature changes on the inside. The big changes obviously going from the M1 chip to the M2 chip. That's the next generation of Apple Silicon. We left the Intel era behind a couple of years ago. So the M2, where does that fall into the Apple chip lineup? It's a little bit confusing. You have the M1 still available in the $999 MacBook Air and the Mac Mini and a few other things. You've got the M2 now. That's the second place. Faster than that, however, are still the M1 Pro, the M1 Max, and the M1 Ultra, and those chips you can get in the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, and for the Ultra you can get that in the Mac Studio. So those are much more powerful chips. The M2 is really just a modest step up from the M1. You can see a performance difference between them, but I wouldn't go out of my way to upgrade just for that performance difference. Now, if you want to squeeze even a little bit more out of the M2, the 13-inch MacBook Pro that just came out that has the M2 is also a tiny bit faster than the Air. Again, not a huge number, but I think it's because that one has what Apple calls active cooling, which the rest of us call a fan, so you can run the chip hotter for longer. It doesn't have to throttle down. If you'd like to read my full review of the new M2 MacBook Air, see our performance testing charts, all that stuff, you're going to find the link in the description below. It's hard to imagine making big sweeping changes to a product as iconic as the MacBook Air, which despite all the upgrades and design changes has maintained basically the same look for its entire 14-year history. This is the biggest physical change to it. Frankly, I like it a lot. I like the new features, I like the flatter, more squared off design, and of course I love that you can now get it in this midnight color, which brings back one of my favorite looks of all time, which was that old black polycarbonate MacBook from the early 2000s. I've been waiting for someone to recreate that classic MacBook look, and it turns out it was Apple.